And if I talk a little bit more about the kind of family impact and longer term impact,
Yes.
we also have to consider children. The children who sometimes may have to pause their tertiary education because they need to do caregiving duties. There's an impact later on their own career and their own income.
Cancer is the leading cause of death here in Singapore. It's quite possibly the worst thing to happen to someone. It exacts a heavy physical and emotional toll. But we don't talk enough about the financial cost that tends to blindside patients and their families. I'm Andrea Heng, and today on the Money Talks podcast, we are confronting this harsh reality head on. I'm joined today by Dr. Chia. He is Group Director for Clinical Services at the Singapore Cancer Society. And together, we will unpack for you the real costs, the support structures in place, and the crucial conversations that we all need to have. It's a difficult yet essential conversation, so let's get right into it. Hi, Dr. Chia.
Hi, Andrea.
All right, good to have you here with us. Now, I would imagine that the first thing someone thinks of when they get diagnosed with cancer, Dr. Chia, is their mortality. When does money come into the picture, and what's the first thing that patients ask about it?
The money starts to kicking in a way from screening to diagnosis.
Right.
So screening does not give us the absolute diagnosis on whether you have or not have cancer.
It's just the first layer of checks.
That's right. Yeah. So for example, if you have a FIT kit, that's for testing for colorectal cancer screening. If it's positive, you need to then take the next step to do a colonoscopy.
Yes.
And that will be a cost. So that will be what I call the pre-diagnosis stage. There will be costs involved. And while it seems huge at this juncture, when you think of going for a colonoscopy, not just in terms of finances, but the logistics, and the whole I need to take time away from work kind of thing.
Exactly, and that comes at a cost too.
Yes, that's an indirect cost.
Exactly.
And if you think about it that way, it seems huge. But if you actually find out early, you might be saving costs downstream.
When you speak with patients that get diagnosed with cancer, at what point in their journey do they start asking you questions about money?
Most of them do start having that question of money quite early, and everyone is different. We go through this process of grief.
Yes.
And it's even at the first instance of diagnosis, if the patient says, no, I'm okay, but perhaps they need time to process.
Yes.
We are generally a very literate society, very collected and very rational in our thoughts.
Yes.
So sometimes we don't realize it until emotions set in a bit later. But the topic of money do come early because there is also a huge consideration factor in whether I want to proceed with what kind of treatment and the downstream.
Is that the first thing that they tend to ask? How much am I expected to pay?
Quite often, at the first instance, most of them will think about the money. And it's almost quite common.
Okay.
I wouldn't say it's majority, but in a recent study also, we realized that about 40% of them would actually be very concerned about costs.
Yeah.
So that's quite a huge, significant number.
But not unexpected also, because we're quite a practical society here.
That's right. And in Singapore, people always say it's about costs and you cannot afford to be ill.
See, that's the thing. That I'm glad that you said that they cannot afford to be ill. And when they get diagnosed with an illness, not just cancer, the first thing that comes to their mind is, how much am I going to have to fork out to treat myself? Why is that such a problem?
As a society, our views about money and financing is something that, we are very particular, and it's something that is in our radar all the time.
Yes.
There is a high cost of living in Singapore. And by and large, when people talk about how am I doing financially, they don't really talk about, I need to prepare for my cancer fees.
No one really thinks about it
Nobody
that
thinks
way.
about that. So that comes as a surprise. So can you imagine if you are living day to day or month by month and suddenly you have this diagnosis landing on your shoulders? The first thing you will think about is that in terms of proportion, how much bigger is that going to cost?
Exactly.
Compared to my daily expenses.
Correct. I think you nailed it right on the head there, the fact that it's a shock and people don't expect it. And the moment they get that kind of diagnosis, we get sent in a panic. And that's human to react that way. Let's go further. Once a person is diagnosed with cancer, we want to talk about the treatment process that falls in line after that. What can we expect to pay in terms of post-diagnosis expenses?
So from the time of diagnosis, I would maybe divide it into the direct cost of the treatment, the healthcare treatment and all those. Let's say a patient steps into the consult room, the first thing you'll know, you have to pay consult fees.
Yes, of course.
And then you have to decide or have a discussion about what treatment is appropriate and what are your options.
Yep.
So treatment come with costs. By and large, we have the chemotherapy, the radiotherapy and surgery. So that's the more direct scope in a way. It's highly variable.
Yes, of
the
course.
cost is going to be very variable depending on the staging and not just about the disease. It's also dependent on your options.
Yes.
Are you going to get it at a restructured hospital?
Right.
Are you going to get it at private hospital?
Correct.
And all those. And on top of that, let's remember that it's not going to be just one consult. You're going to have some follow-ups. So there will be some consultation fees that will follow up. There will be other things that will slowly kick in. For example, transport fees. In the first stage, you might be still, in a way, physically and functioning quite well. You could take public transport, perhaps. But there will be additional costs. We all know simple things like parking is expensive in a hospital.
See,
right?
simple things like that, things that we take for granted every day as a well person. Things like transport as an expense, and it's something that we have to factor in. What about longer term care expenses?
Yeah, so the longer term, just now we mentioned a bit about the treatment options. So let's say for chemotherapy, some of you may not realize this, but you need to pay to sit on the chemo chair.
Oh, wow.
So these are considered things like as consumables.
So that's outside of the actual chemotherapy treatment?
Yes,
Oh, wow.
that's right.
Okay.
So it could be packaged together,
Right.
but there are costs involved in that. And and just now we are speaking about transportation.
Yes.
So just now we only touched about public transport and maybe private car and car park fees.
Yes.
But the next thing we need to think about is what if you need to take a taxi because your blood count is low?
Yep.
You can't be really taking public transport for your own safety. And so that's taxi, that's Grab or private hire. And then you have the next stage, which is when you're really weak and in a way bed-bound, and you need to have treatment in the facilities outside. You might even need to get an ambulance.
Let's assume people have insurance. Most people do have some kind of insurance. Are all forms of cancer covered by most insurance plans here in Singapore?
I would say that there are many products outside in terms of insurance products, and I would not try to be the master of all insurance products there. It's highly variable.
It's complicated, yeah.
I would say buy insurance early. Early on. Premiums will be much lower. That's number one. Number two, you never know when you get hit with something, an illness or something that you discover later on. But if you're covered early when you're healthy, premiums are lower and you are likely to be covered for everything as much as the product covers. And if you only do it much later, you might be excluded for certain conditions because of pre-existing illnesses or family history, and premiums might shoot up. Having said that, do remember that do declare. And you might be able to find insurers sometimes where they're willing to cover pre-existing conditions, but at a higher premium, for example. So some products, I think, from my dad's personal experience, they cover a list of more common cancers and conditions. So for the very rare ones, it might not be covered. I'm not too sure.
Sure.
But for the more advanced ones, perhaps it will be covered because your other insurance coverage, if you do have, probably will cover things like hospitalization, follow-up pre-post hospitalization, outpatient treatments and
out-of-work expenses also. Yeah. I think my financial planner introduced this early critical illness plan to me. I found it a bit expensive at the time, but maybe it's time for me to reconsider.
So even for myself, I mean, I got insured really early.
Right.
First year at work, I got my financial advisor
Wow.
to really insure whatever I could and whatever I could afford. I think it's a need to balance. You need some coverage, but you need to really look at what you can afford and what's the best value. Don't shun it completely.
Yeah. So you talked about some of the costs earlier, direct and indirect costs, right? Can we talk about the range? So from doctor's appointments to chemotherapy to radiotherapy, etc., and follow-ups as well. I understand that they can be provided or offered as a package, but perhaps give us a ballpark range, if you will, so that we just have a clearer understanding of the digits.
So perhaps before subsidies, it could range in a restructured hospital. By and large, you're talking about ranging up to a 5-digit figure
Okay.
for all of the treatment. And it depends on
In
whether you
total
have...
or?
In total.
In total.
I need to assure you also that while I say that it goes up to like 5, and even for some specific cancer treatments, it goes up to 6-digit figures, like 200 over 1,000.
Right.
It can be as low as few hundreds
Oh, really?
to maybe
Okay.
thousands, that kind of range.
Right.
And there are assistance, welfare assistance, financial assistance available right from the government side all the way to, like even in Singapore Cancer Society. Be assured that there are people and there are organizations trying to help
Yes.
everyone defray that.
Absolutely. Just out of curiosity, what's the most common expense that is unexpected, out of pocket? Oh, I didn't know I had to pay for this. So for me, that was the chair that I had to sit in for chemotherapy. Is there anything else that perhaps may not have crossed our minds?
I think we have to remember the day-to-day expenses. For example, milk feeds.
Oh, milk
So
feeds.
when you are getting a bit weaker and you can't really consume very much, you need specialized milk feeds, or you need to, for temporary or permanently, you might require a nasogastric tube, the
That's
tube
right.
that goes down. And those are really ongoing costs. And you still have things like perhaps diapers. Stoma bags, yeah. So there are such consumables that are kind of high volume, small price per item, but they eat into your expenses.
And a caregiver as well, if it's so needed, right?
Yeah, since we're touching a little bit more about the indirect costs involved, family caregiving, there is besides the emotional costs, there is a financial cost of caregiving, instance of absenteeism. And if, let's say, you're working on an hourly wage, for example, or project-based, you can't do certain work, you're losing income. It's not just the usual, I take leave, or I take
Yes.
family care leave, and I'm okay. And if I talk a little bit more about the kind of family impact and longer term impact,
Yes.
we also have to consider children. The children who sometimes may have to pause their tertiary education because they need to do caregiving duties. There's an impact later on their own career and their own income. Of course, not forgetting the own personal loss of income. We do have a lot who survive the cancers very gladly that they are in remission and they return back to work. So we do try to support all of these things to kind of make up for the financial issues that they had previously.
Anecdotally, there are cases in which cancer patients have been able to tap on company insurance for some of these costs. I have a friend who did just that. And it was quite a unique situation for her because she had just gotten this job and she got her cancer diagnosis maybe a month or two into it. And that company was very kind. They said, you know what, go and take the time that you need to go and recover. You can tap on our company insurance. And I've been told that's actually a better route to tap on company insurance before your personal insurance, because in that story I just told you, she was able to undergo more specialized, more expensive treatments so that she can recover better, I suppose. What do you say about that?
By and large, I would say that the company insurance, just like personal insurance, really varies with the product and the coverage. And I would say that if, let's say, you are diagnosed with cancer and you have a discussion about treatment options, yes, by all means, do check in with your company, whether it's HR or who is responsible, to check if you can actually tap on company insurance. And I think that discussion is very much at the discretion of the company. And in this case, she's very fortunate. And it's wonderful to hear that we have companies that actually do that.
Yeah.
I think it's exemplary. But however, we understand the resource limitations. Not all company can afford that kind of premiums and the other economics that runs behind the scene.
Sure.
So smaller companies may not have that kind of insurance. And if a lot of their staff actually have claims, it may affect premiums and all
Yes.
those. So there's a lot of such considerations down the road. But as a patient, you would want to take that step to tap on the company insurance.
Yeah,
and
because
find out.
any way to defray the costs
Yes.
will matter
Yes.
down the road. Now, Dr. Chia, we all hope to optimize our finances during this time. So before we need to tap on insurance, perhaps let's take a look at what is subsidized now. So what can you tell us about subsidies in the area of cancer expenses?
The general framework of subsidies for Singapore healthcare in a restructured hospital would include the basic subsidies that we receive, whether you're Singaporean or Singapore PR. So that's up to 80% or 50%. And then you can tap on the MediShield Life.
Yes.
And you have another safety net, which is the MediFund for those who are really needy. And not forgetting MediSave that you have from your CPF. That's your own personal savings in a way. And on top of that, that's when we actually would find we need to have other help from whether it's your personal insurance, whether it's company insurance, or some for other assistance. Like in Singapore Cancer Society, we also provide additional welfare or financial assistance to patients who, after tapping on all these big items, they find that they still can't cope with the costs.
Yeah. And it is a heavy cost as well. Just a segue here, Dr. Chia. I know of an ALS patient who is undergoing trial right now for a new kind of treatment for ALS, and it's heavily subsidized. Do we have this in the field of oncology? And if so, is this an option that we should consider, especially when we are trying to manage our finances a bit better?
Quick answer is that yes, you can consider.
Okay.
Again, it's case by case.
Sure.
Depending on the trial. And by and large, they will cover things like the new treatment options, the follow-up consults that are related to the new treatment options. And be assured also that they always fall back on the gold standard current.
Sure.
In case anything differs from there. For example, the treatment outcomes are not as ideal. They always fall back on what is the current best gold standard in that sense. But it could differ again from new trials depending on the scope. And also it depends on your own wishes as a patient, on understanding really whether there is a risk, what's the risk involved, what's your risk appetite. So that's very much dependent on your discussion. Be assured that by and large, all these trials go through ethics, go through a lot of rigorous testing before that. So the safety profile is not completely established, but it's safe enough for us to conduct human trials. That's the kind of assurance that we give you. But really, at the end of the day, I can tell you all these, but when I'm sitting on the chair as a patient, deciding, really make that decision together with your loved ones and be very well informed about what you're getting yourself into.
Yeah, absolutely. I think that was a really good piece of advice there. We can say everything and provide you with all the information there is out there, but ultimately you're the one that is, like you said, sitting in that chair, getting the treatment. What will be covered or subsidized if the cancer comes back?
So by and large, government subsidies will still apply.
Okay.
Because
that's good news.
That's across board.
Okay.
But however, in terms of company insurance or personal insurance, it really depends. When you describe such a scenario, people will think about the multi-pay critical illness coverage.
Correct.
So that's to kind of protect individuals from a relapse or a second critical condition, and they will have their payouts according to the products that you bought.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay,
so,
understand.
Yeah.
What about medical complications that arise from having cancer? Are those covered by subsidies and insurance plans as well?
So things like mental health illnesses, depression, anxiety, and whether it's rehabilitation needs, these are generally subsidized if you go by the subsidized route. and at the restructured hospitals. But if you're going by the private way, then it's not subsidized, unfortunately. And you still have to tap on your insurance depending on your products. Usually, most of the products out there, if they're not multi-pay critical illness, it's one time and your policy kind of terminates and ends.
Have you heard of patients toggling between private and public during their cancer treatment, just to maximize and optimize their financial positions? Have you seen such scenarios? Because it suddenly came to my mind that I would do that if I could.
So it's not uncommon if someone says that I heard that this doctor is really good, but he's in private practice. So I will go to the private side to see him and have some treatment, part of the treatment there, and then I'll go subsidize for part of another treatment. So that's also whether it's going to be covered by subsidy and are you allowed to do that. It's highly variable. You have options, but whether you receive the same subsidies and all those, it really varies.
Sure. Okay. And I hate to paint the worst case scenario, but we have to. There are cancer patients who may not be insured. You can be of lower income, but you are insured. But what if you have the double whammy? You are not insured and you don't have the finances to fund your treatment, your cancer treatment. What can they do then? What kind of support is available?
So by and large, charities will help to support some of these. And while I say that statement, I think someone who has just a cancer diagnosis will be asking me, what do I do next? I know charities do that.
Yes.
So, for example, you can always come and approach Singapore Cancer Society. We have a hotline, 1-800-SCS, which stands for 727-3333. So you can always share with us whether it's for financial assistance or other kind of assistance to find out where else can I get help? And we try to help you navigate that journey. Even my friends who had cancer didn't realize is that we have this cancer care fund.
Oh, yes.
So
I've heard of that. Yeah.
If you have a diagnosis and within the 6 months and you hold a blue CHAS card or orange CHAS card, you can just approach us and let us know and we can give you a once-off financial support.
Oh, that's fantastic.
Yes, currently it's for the blue CHAS card, it's $1,000 once off and $500 once off for the orange CHAS card.
Dr. Chia, any parting remarks, last messages?
I would say number one is that having a cancer diagnosis is not a death sentence. Do not be afraid to face it because we are here as Singapore Cancer Society to try and support everyone. And number two, do not be afraid about the costs. Someone is going to help you. And really, if you don't know where to approach, give us a call and we will try our best to help you navigate through the system. Do not fear about going for screening and all these. Early prevention, early diagnosis is always the key to a very good quality of life, even if you have cancer.
I think the biggest takeaway from that is, Dr. Chia, all you need to do is reach out for help.
Yes.
And someone will be there. Thank you so much for sharing them, Dr. Chia.
Thank you very much, Andrea.
And thank you as well for watching. Now, if you know a cancer patient, send this episode across, speak to your medical professional, and as always, reach out. Someone is going to be there to hold your hand and walk you through the process. You can find Money Talks on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, YouTube, as well as the Me Listen app. Leave us a rating while you are there. And a big thank you to Tiffany Ang, Junaini Johari, Joanne Chan, Hanida Amin, and Arjun Bala. I'm Andrea Heng, and this has been the Money Talks podcast. Thank you for listening.